Well, there you go. Big bad builders at times running out, quite so. Well, bienvenue, welcome once again to Cladding Matters, where we talk about the ongoing struggles, specifically within the cladding industry. And today, in particular reference to Iraq, the Royal Artillery Keys, those are effectively locked in, of which Steve Day is but one of many, I should say. And, well, before we get going, I'm going to toss the ball over to Hamish.
Interestingly enough, there's a band which I rather write, and there's a particular DVD, if you like, or film of theirs which they produced, which was entitled "The Song Remains the Same." Now, strangely enough, for the last sort of 22 years, 23 years, the song sort of remains the same, with a building which came about around about the early part of this century.
Good Lord.
Keys. And it has stayed pretty much the same. Now, subsequent to that having been built, which was built under strange regulations which were permitted at the time, there were still stringent building regulations which should have been met, and they were signed off. Yet the building, subsequent to the likes of Grenfell Tower, have been found not to be safe at all. Now, part of what we're doing is a tribute to those who did lose their lives at Grenfell. And if we don't continue to remember people, or remember those people who suffered, and the information we've now gained, and one would hope the experience that we've gained from that, it would be sort of sad indeed. So basically, a building was signed off as being safe in those early days, and it isn't safe. And we have so much evidence to actually point in the direction of indicating that it isn't safe. Yet we have a council and we have a builder who maintains somehow or other it is safe.
Yes, and what gets me, Hamish, is they were gauche enough to actually put forward a comment, or rather a message, which they put out to all the existing tenants, saying, "Oh, don't worry, there were no building regs ever contravened at the time of building." But there's so much evidence to the contrary. It amazes me.
Well, the unfortunate thing is their own building control at the council deemed the property to be unsafe. It failed the building regulations. And if it's failing the building regulations 20 years on, unfortunately, the residents have had to live under those. Fortunately, they didn't know anything about it until 2018. But you actually think about this now. It has been known that this place is at fire risk for that period of time, at the same length of time that we have not figured out who is responsible for what happened at Grenfell.
So basically what you're saying is it was a fire risk back then. We had demonstration of what can happen when it all goes wrong with cladding, and yet for 20 years they've sat on their hands.
Yes, it's signed off, but not safe.
And to that end, and thank you very much for that introduction, we have a little piece which I managed to cobble together, and Steve Day has brilliantly created a video for it as well, which I'm going to play for you now. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah. You said it was safe. Let's have a little look at that. Signed off but not safe. Behind the walls we saw the stage. You wrote the words, we felt the flames. Now you're hiding behind the game. Hey. Signed off but not safe. Truth don't bend and truth don't break. We got proof, so save that face, 'cause lives were risked in that place. Yeah. They said it's tight, no wrecks were broke. But I got files and mother flipping smoke. Dot and dab like you building a joke. Render too thin, insulation's a hoax. Told the press, nah, we don't see a breach. While your own emails out here preach. Compartment missed, that's fire code 101. But now you're ducking like you on the run. Fixing's wrong, spacing off. Steel with plastic bag, you taking them off a fluff. 2004, regs were clear. But now it's all asking HBC, not here. You signed it off, now duck the blame. But I ain't here just to play no game. It's lives, not lines on a builder's plan. So step up, council, be the mother flipping man. Not safe behind the walls, we saw the stage. You wrote the words, we felt the flames. Now you're hiding behind the game. Signed off but not safe. Truth don't bend and truth don't break. We got proof, so save that face. Cause lives were risked in that place. You talking standards while flouting the facts. Meanwhile residents paying council tax. What's that buy? A box with cladding that burns. And letters that gaslight like it ain't our concern. Yeah, Pre said the system flopped. E bodged and corners chopped. So if there's no breach, then what's the repair? Why you out here patching there? You wrote the rule book, now you won't read it. Truth's in your inbox, you just won't heed it. So here's your reminder, scribbled in bars. You can't hide the truth behind PR. Signed off but not safe. We see the cracks behind the paint. You took a risk and passed the blame, but we won't play that council game. Whoa. Signed off but not safe. Your words won't cover what they can't face. The truth is loud, no need to shout. We've called you out.
I'm asking you to believe me that a £33 million mistake is evidence for the amateur to argue that you reject the so-called professional arguments, you listen to the tenants, you look with your own eyes.
A resident here for 20 years has to live with daily.
That's like a firelighter when you're starting a barbecue. Except it's no sausages, it's people.
Well, that was stirring. Steve, give us the latest.
Well, so the latest is the building regulator, safety regulator, has signed off Royal Artillery Keys today for the remediation plan, which basically is using the watered down PAS 9980 standard that we've been talking about for the last 6 months. So I've put in a request for information basically for the details of what the remediation will be. And I've given notice to the building owners that you're going to pay for everything under a legal construct called a remediation order if Barratt doesn't include it in their PAS 9980 remediation. So we're going to need two, potentially. But as today's session is really to look at just what happened with residents' concerns. And the real background to this is, in the Grenfell inquiry, residents were ignored. And someone actually wrote a letter in saying there's only a single escape route. And it was just dismissed by the council. And if you have a look on various articles about how residents are ignored, it was actually brought out in the Grenfell inquiry that actual issues on fire safety were ignored by the council. And of course, after Grenfell, you would have thought we would have been in a different situation. So this is a little bit of an expose on just how one council is dealing with us, Royal Artillery Keys. Really, I'm just going to say what they said and just briefly go over the evidence that counters it.
Please do.
So, and then we'll maybe have a little discussion just on what that means. But so, firstly, the council wrote to me after I asked them to use a power under the Building Act, which basically makes Barratt pay if an injunction is issued against them via the council's power. And obviously that needs a court, so the council applies to the court, but ultimately the building owner gets the liability, and then it will ultimately be passed on to Barratt. That's how it would have worked, and could work. But as part of our discussions, the council pushed back on me and said, yes, you're right, you could use that power, but there's no evidence of construction breaches at the time of the building.
What they stating that the construction breaches would only be relevant against current standards, and the standards back then were more lenient, so therefore it's fine. But what you're saying is actually they weren't that lenient, and you were breaching them anyway.
Yes, and that's a key finding, right? If that were true, then I wouldn't. We can't sort of retrospectively say the laws changed, now you're guilty when you were innocent earlier. Yeah. Unfortunately, Barratt homes were not innocent, and this is why. So firstly, and I think Hamish referred to this, the building control department, after the building was built in around 2004, came in 2019, so a long time afterwards, but they didn't sign it off. Private building control signed it off, so that was NHBC. And what they did in 2019, they say that the works were carried out using the building regulations 2000. So that's the version. So we know what to reference. Right. And there's a regulation stipulate that the entire staircase should be fully compartmentalized, as it's the sole means of escape. And then they say, however, as we, the local authority, didn't sign it off, we're surprised it was ever signed off without any of the required compartmentalization. And then they say, I therefore advise that you contact NHBC. Well, that doesn't sound very responsible for a council. Yeah, it's illegal. No. This is a law, but just check with them. Just check with them. Yeah.
Well, hang on. Isn't it just sliding off one set of shoulders onto another set of shoulders?
Well, it seems to be that nothing was done. I can't find any response. Anyway, the proof's in the pudding. So the real reason is at the bottom floor of each stair, there's a lift and a staircase like there is in most blocks of flats. There's meant to be a fire door separating them, right? And there is.
But you've shown me actual diagrams, and they're never even put in one.
No, and that diagram is the root cause. There's meant to be a big fire door, and there isn't on all 8 towers. So it's not like this is a bit of debatable point. There is either a big fire door there or there isn't, and there isn't. And so that's our first piece of evidence. And of course, that is then backed up by a London Fire Brigade enforcement notice, and they say. This was done in the last couple of months, and they said the firefighting shaft was not in efficient working order because fire door protection separate the single escape staircase from the firefighting lift, so that's that ground floor area,
right,
was not in place. It was missing, they'd say. So that was backed up. And remember, the whole point of this is to say, is there any evidence that the law wasn't followed? Because the council is saying there isn't. So the first thing they've got to do is they've got to dismiss the London Fire Brigade evidence and dismiss the evidence of their own building control department, right?
It's always nice to know that the council have obviously got so much knowledge and experience in this area that they feel capable of countermanding the statements made by these experienced specialists here to the contrary.
Well, that's right. But it doesn't stop there, unfortunately, for the council. So the next piece of evidence is the internal wall. So the internal wall separating the flats internally, if you've got your next door, the other side of, say, your lounge wall or your bedroom, then that's got to have something called fire stopping, so that if you put pipes between the flats, the fire and the smoke can't just jump between the flats.
Right.
Anyway, so they did a big survey of some flats at RAG, I think 4 or 5, and they said, our survey establishes that the areas surveyed currently do not meet the minimum statutory requirements. So that's the legal requirements. Without
there's another area they've kind of
the internal walls, but they go quite strong, right? If you don't do it, so and without remedial attention, it is conceivable that any fire incident could result in a significant loss and possible prosecution of the responsible persons. That's the managing agent and the 2 building owners. So they're quite strong there. And it doesn't say exactly what's lost. Is it people's lives? Is it the building? Is it both? But they do say possible prosecution. So it's obviously pretty serious defects. And again, that's evidence of unlawful construction. Then, and it gets worse for the council, because then the cladding manufacturer, after residents put in a lot of work to try and get them to turn up, basically, and do an investigation, and which they did. And this is Saint-Gobain, who incidentally has liked our last Cladding Matters podcast. And that's a company with 1 million followers. So that, you know,
thank you very much, guys out there, for sort of taking notice and liking us. That's very good.
And we do appreciate the fact that Saint-Gobain actually did come, you know, so I don't have a beef with them at all. They did well. Anyway, so they do an investigation. They put up scaffolding and they look at the external walls, which is these big white walls that we have 90% of the building. Right. And then they say the external wall system on the elevation is not in accordance with the specification originally provided by Weber for RAC. So Weber is the sub company that installed it. But that's all part of Saint-Gobain. So the cladding manufacturer is saying it didn't meet the specification, and it fails on render thickness, which is very important for fire safety. The law says even small differences on these three things, so render thickness being one of them, can cause a different behavior in the event of a fire. They also fail on plastic fixings. They have meant to have metal on the fire breaks, but they're plastic. And they also fail on the fact that the installation was just stuck on with a dot and dab. So you get your paintbrush, you go stop. It's meant to be a careful grid pattern, because grids, anyone who knows about proper adhesive knows that these patterns do actually make it stick better. Anyway, so again, bad news for the council, because now the cladding manufacturer, who's done a full investigation, has actually said some alarming findings. Then a fire risk assessment, which was done for the developer contract, as PAS 9980, goes even further. And it says, and this is the same external wall the cladding manufacturer looked at, it said the observed workmanship defects listed below are serious and mean that the BR135, that's the test evidence that they use to say, well, if you install it like this, you get this behavior in the event of a fire. It says that test evidence sponsored by the manufacturer Saint-Gobain cannot be relied upon to predict as-built system performance. So that's saying you don't have any test evidence to know if this thing is safe, because no one is going to install it like this. Barrett cut corners, they stuck their plastic fixings in, they made the render too thin, they put a bit of dot and dab to stick it on the wall, and the fire risk people are saying, you don't know now how it performs in the event of a fire. You've put people's lives at risk for 22 years at RAC, and there's no thought whatsoever to that. It's just defeat the residents.
We've had a comment already, which is lovely, from Wendy Gibson. I think so much effort and energy has been expended avoiding taking any action against the offending parties. Imagine how much good can be done if the council spent that energy instead on supporting their residents and enforcing remediation. And you know, all this begs the question: how much life loss is okay? What are we happy with? 50 people dying? 5 people dying? Maybe just 1 or 2. Would that be all right?
No, that's a good question. And clearly the evidence here shows that, you know, they obviously didn't care about human life. And the last 2 things I'll mention is there was another report done previous to that, another fire assessment, which was about 4 years ago, which also concluded that the EWI Weber system was not installed to manufacturer's requirements. And then crucially, all the building regulations enforced at the time of construction, which is the same wording the council used to dismiss the evidence.
Right.
And finally, we have a court order from the 2 building owners.
Wow.
Which also says, in their submission to the first tier tribunal, consequently, the external facade was not compliant with the building regulations at the time of construction, right?
Right.
Done. And remember, let me just go back as where we started. So all of that evidence, and the council have said there is no evidence that the original construction breached building regulations at the time. That is not true. I think we've demonstrated that. And for them to maintain their position, they would have to dismiss the London Fire Brigade, the fire engineering reports, the court submission, and all the very observable defects, like the missing fire doors at the bottom of each steps, which anyone can validate.
It always gets me that if you've got a mere skim of render, things held on barely adhered because it's dot and dab, is basically a hit and miss effect, and the fact that the panels are held on by bits of plastic, it's demonstrably crazy. And the fact that the council are doubling down, and I believe, am I right in saying that communications has been lost now, Steve?
Yes, I've been blocked by the leader of the council on LinkedIn. And a number of residents have written in basically with the evidence.
Right.
And there's been no reply. They do not want to admit that they basically said something that's completely untrue. And the effect is it stirred up a lot of anger at RAC and made my life more difficult than it should be, because I should be being supported by my local elected representatives.
You would have thought so.
Torn down.
Hamish, because we're running a bit long today, would you care to take us home?
As I said at the start, the song remains the same. You cannot walk away from a situation some almost 25 years ago now, when something was built not to the specification it should have been built. That song remains the same. So if you're all dazed and confused, another great song which would actually come through if you listen to the soundtrack from The Song Remains the Same. But as we well know, there's a sign off, but it's not safe.
Thank you, one and all, for this, and to everyone who's contributed to all this, to everyone that showed an interest. The fight's not over. We need these people to see sense. We need the council to stop hiding in a corner and take action, and we need them to see the validity and the veracity of all the evidence that Steve has amassed, that continues to be blatant and in our face how wrong this is. And I leave you with one thought: how much human life are we happy with losing? Just give me a number. Is it 1? Is it 10? You know, to me, it should be 0. It seems simple to me. And so until next week, on that bombshell, I thank you all for taking part in this. Thank you, Steve Day. Please, people, look at thebuildingsafety.org. And Hamish McClay, thank you for facilitating and being a part of this. And to you out there, please do help us. If anybody out there in the BBC, in LBC, or any other Cs out there who see what we're doing here and feel free to want to promote it, I would say this is a story. This is a great story. This is one that should be talked about, and more people should be raising the banner about this. Until next week, keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars, and let's get success for RAC soon. Bye-bye now.
There's a